Please note that this webinar is being recorded and is also being live streamed on Facebook. Good day from the Philippines. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to friends and guests who are joining us from other parts of the globe. My name is Jardeleza Mijares from the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, and I will be serving as your host for today's event. It is my honor to welcome you all to the 2024 Climate Research as If People Mattered webinar series. This session is titled Efficient Energy Transition, Science and Stakeholder Engagement, the Case of Philippine Electricity Policy. This is the final session of our climate research webinar series, picking up from last week's session. Today, we will explore how the energy transition might look like for the Philippines and what factors are at play. The Climate Research webinar series is organized by the My Climate Risk Ateneo de Manila University Regional Hub, hosted by the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability. My Climate Risk, or MCR, is a lighthouse activity of the World Climate Research Program, aiming to mainstream and develop a more bottom-up approach to regional climate risk. This starts with a better understanding of local context and the requirements of decision makers. Hence, our webinar series, where we explore the different contexts and experiences of climate change. This webinar series, today we tackle how the different contexts and experiences of climate change are considered and how we may apply these in research design and management plans. Today's session in particular will deep dive into the science, stakeholder engagement, and policy angle on the energy issue. We will learn about this and more in today's session. It's nice to see some familiar names join us in today's event. But if this is your first time joining one of our webinars, we hope that you stick around, join us in our future events, and hopefully become part of the My Climate Risk community. We would also like to thank our colleagues from the Development Academy of the Philippines, the Ateneo Department of Economics, and the wider Ateneo community for your support. Just some reminders before we start. Please note that the program is being recorded on Zoom. On Zoom, all participants are muted automatically as they enter the meeting room. Throughout the session, kindly type in your comments or questions in the chat box here on Zoom. Participants through Facebook Live may also type in their comments or questions in the comments section. We will collect all these for the open forum later on. And finally, there will be an evaluation survey at the end of the session. Requests for e-certificates may be made through the same form. At this point, we would like to ask everyone to settle in for the prayer to be followed by the Philippine National Anthem. I invite everyone to make the sign of their faith. This is the interfaith prayer for our climate. We hold the earth. We hold siblings who suffer from storms and droughts intensified by climate change. We hold all species that suffer. We hold world leaders delegated to make decisions for life. We pray that the web of life may be mended through courageous actions to limit carbon emissions. We pray for right actions for adaptation and mitigation to help our already suffering Earth community. We pray that love and wisdom might inspire my actions and our actions as communities, so that we may, with integrity, look into the eyes of our siblings and all beings and truthfully say we are doing our part to care for them and the future of the children. May love transform us and our world with new steps toward life.
Bayang magiliw, pelas ang sinanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisiin. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bukaw, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdiningning, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng walhating pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang hinigaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Now, to formally welcome everyone to today's webinar, may we call on Dr. Charlotte Kendra Gotangco Gonzales, focal point of My Climate Risk, Ateneo de Manila University Regional Hub, and Director of the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability. Dr. Gotangco Gonzales, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this session with Dr. Majah-Leah Ravago. For those of you who might already be familiar with the My Climate Risk Hub from our previous events, you might be mildly surprised at our lineup this semester. The My Climate Risk Lighthouse activity is all about building a bottom-up understanding of climate risk and subsequent climate action. So what might immediately come to mind are the challenges of adaptation and how we engage stakeholders meaningfully towards adaptation solutions. When we think about the energy sector, it's usually in terms of mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. But I would argue that perhaps sometimes energy sits in that nexus of mitigation and adaptation. This is an issue that's so tied up with our lifestyles and in our culture. In the My Climate Risk Hub, we want to better understand how people make sense of their experiences related to climate change. And energy, more specifically the lack of it in many cases, and how we cope with that lack, is part of that experience of the climate crisis. For example, how do we cope with repeated power outages as an impact of climate change combined with the inadequacy of our energy infrastructure? These outages have happened when rainfall was inadequate for hydropower systems. How do we grapple with poverty and providing necessary assistance, for example, to households that are not on the grid and may still be relying on coal when we want to transition out of cheap fossil fuels? So these are the kinds of questions relating to the energy sector that show us how crucial it is to have a systems perspective. Now, interestingly, I first met Doc Maha on a project called Coastal Cities at Risk. And if I remember correctly, she was working on the impacts of extreme weather events on the economy, on the formal and informal sectors. So it is wonderful to see her spectrum of work in the field of climate resilient development. And I know that she brings with her today a systems perspective of the issues, of the synergies and tensions that we face in both adaptation and mitigation. So I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gotangco Gonzales, for highlighting the importance of today's session on the energy sector as part of our experience of the climate crisis, aptly opening the last session of this webinar series. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Majah-Leah V. Ravago is the 10th president of the Development Academy of the Philippines and an economist with solid leadership skills. She is an associate professor in the Department of Economics at the Ateneo de Manila University and has directed and led a multi-million-dollar project funded by the USAID and research and policy projects funded by the Philippine House of Representatives. She has extensive experience as a policy advisor to the Philippine Competition Commission, the National Economic and Development Authority, and the Philippine Congress. She has been a research consultant to the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia in Indonesia. An output-driven academic, she has co-edited books and published in international journals on topics and issues on competition policy, energy and electricity, disasters, agriculture, and sustainable economic development. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of Hawaii, Manoa, and has received awards including the 2016 Outstanding Young Scientist in Economics from the National Academy of Science and Technology. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed speaker, our colleague from the Department of Economics and President of the Development Academy of the Philippines, Dr. Majah-Leah V. Ravago. Ma'am, Dr. Ravago, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me share my screen first. Okay, do you see it?
Yes, we see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, first of all, to Jean, Kendra, Achut, and the rest of colleagues from the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to share this ongoing research. Actually, this presentation is two parts, one on efficient energy transition, and another one, I'd like to share our experience on engaging our stakeholders in the process of managing several projects on energy and electricity. So this is still an ongoing research. So just to be sure, let me just offer this semantics on energy transition. What I mean on energy transition or decarbonization, this is a shift from fossil-based fuels such as oil, natural gas, and coal to renewable energy sources like wind, solar, and biomass. Now, facilitating energy transition in developing countries like the Philippines entails a different approach than in developed countries. Income levels, preferences, energy market structures, and institutions are fundamentally different between these two groups of countries. While developed countries may choose to take leadership positions regarding climate mitigation, the developing countries prioritizing increasing living standards or improving welfare. Okay, so transitioning to cleaner energy implies transitioning to electricity-only resources. So this means that electricity would be at the center of this transition. Hence, it implies electrification. Therefore, electricity would replace fossil fuels in transportation, space cooling, air condition, heating, industrial heating, and many others. Now, electrification will also change our daily consumption patterns. Right now, an example would be when we hit the critical penetration of electric vehicle. Right now, there is a law on adoption of electric vehicle. But when it hits, let's say, 25%, then the peak circuit loads would grow about 30%. So this means that our electricity consumption, where it peaks, let's say, in the middle of the day, consumption peak might shift to midnight when EVs are being charged at home. So it will change the electricity consumption patterns. So with these changes, energy efficiency comes in. Now, what is energy efficiency? There are several definitions in the literature. You might pick one, but economic efficiency indicators, sometimes there is an interchangeably definition of, or interchange interchangeably usage of energy intensity and energy efficiency. It measures both input and output in monetary terms. There is also the engineering definition and the United Nations definition. Now, we ask what is the role of energy efficiency in this transition to cleaner energy. So as the economy becomes more and more electrified and powered by renewables, the system warrants more energy efficient solutions towards this transition to cleaner energy. Because once electrification is underway, it is essential to maximize energy efficiency in all sectors where electricity is being used. And it entails, the cheapest one would be just changing behavior. Okay, changing behavior means we are cognizant in, unplugging electricity outlet when not in use, on unplugging appliances when they are not in use when we are leaving the house. And some of these energy efficiency measures may also require investments, such as installing smart meters in our homes, buying energy efficient appliances and technologies. We now see energy efficient air cons, the one with inverters, or energy efficient refrigerators, those inverted refrigerators, or revving up charging at times when there is an excess when there is an excess energy from solar and wind generation. So that would be at the macro level. Now, there is also this illustration of stages of electrification-based transition. On the y-axis, you have here the degree of smart grid-based energy system, and on the y-axis and on the x-axis, you have here the degree of electrification of energy system. So here, the transition requires, different stages or different phases. For students out there, this would also require the study of the optimal, meaning to say the best when to transition from different phases or from different stages. What would be the best stages and timing? So we have this idea of electrification-based transition. Now, going back on the difference between developed and developing countries, on the screen, I'm showing the speed of penetration of renewable energy in the energy system between these two group of countries. I'd like to draw your attention on the green line. This is the renewable energy in high-income countries. We see how it accelerated over the years. Compare that with the low and middle-income countries. You see here that there is still a catching up to do by the low and middle income countries. Why is that? Energy transition in developing countries still requires scaling up renewables in the energy mix. And we cannot look at this in a vacuum, that we are only concentrating on attracting generation in the generation investments to increase the renewable energy in the generation mix, because this requires concomitant investments in our infrastructure, because it needs to transform the power sector infrastructure, especially the transmission infrastructure, because you may have the generation of electricity from renewable sources, but if you do not have the concomitant investment in transmission, how can you deliver those increase in the generation capacity? And then it also requires promoting energy efficiency. At the same time, while we're trying to transition to cleaner energy, developing countries, because by its very nature, it's still the development agenda is still improving the well-being, or improving the living standards of its citizens. So it means for the energy sector, meeting the increasing demand of electricity or energy, keeping energy or electricity affordable, and providing access to the rest of the population. As of today, not all Filipinos have access to electricity. And then in all this transition, we recognize incentives, but mandates and subsidies tend to decrease efficiency in terms of transitioning to cleaner energy. Efficiency means facilitating renewable adoption when it is cheaper. It's not just cheaper, but socially cheaper. I will explain this in a while. So Energy transition and efficiency in developing countries present unique challenges and opportunities. Let's take the case of the Philippines, since we're more familiar. The Philippines, the country, aspires to have 35% of renewable in the fuel mix by 2030 and 50% by 2040. Let's look at where we are now. So this is a snapshot of the generation mix of the entire country in 2022, the latest data we can find. You see here that RE in the generation mix has a share of 22%. So you might say that we aspire for 35%, that we are near this goal. But note that this 22% already includes the traditional, what we actually have, the geothermal, hydro, and it also includes biomass, the green one, solar, and wind. And you see here that this variable renewable wind and solar is relatively small for the entire country. And what is big, what's taking up a lion's share in the generation mix for the entire country is still coal. Coal here is still 58% of the generation mix. And this is the snapshot for the three-island grid, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Now, let's look at the three-island grid. Let's look at the patterns of the generation mix historically for the three-island grids. So this is for Luzon. For Luzon in 2022, 15% of the generation mix is renewable energy. And again, here, this is hydro, biomass, solar, and wind. So this is that 15%. And what is this light blue? This is natural gas. When we had the Malampaya, when the country discovered Malampaya way back in 2001, it powered or generate electricity for Luzon about 30%. But it is now being depleted, so the share of natural gas is slowly decreasing and is expected to be depleted by year 2025. And we can see what replaces this natural gas is not really renewable energy, but rather coal. So there are still relatively more coal in Luzon than renewable. And if you look at the Visayas, this is largely orange. Okay, so orange is geothermal. So a lot of our geothermal are concentrated in the Visayas, and it constitute a bigger share of the generation mix. But if you look again at the historical share, starting 2013, it already start to decrease. And the biggest share of the variable renewable, meaning wind and solar, is in the Visayas. So including geothermal, 44% of the generation mix is renewable in the Visayas region. And again, if you look at this is somehow a good news because diesel has actually decreased over time. And what replaces the depletion of this or the decrease in the share of geothermal and the diesel is still coal, as you can see here in the figure. And for Mindanao, most of our hydropower is sourced in Mindanao, meaning to say most of the electricity in Mindanao is powered by hydro. But over time, because rivers have dried up, electricity from hydro have also decreased in the share. And you see here that this is where we experienced the rotating brownouts, if you remember, during this year. And we still have geothermal and a large of diesel. But over time, this has actually reduced. And again, what replaces this is still coal. So you can see here, it's still largely coal. And combining hydro, wind, and solar, very small, 37% of the generation mix in Mindanao is still renewable energy. So based from this mix, historically, if you look at the age profile distribution of coal power plants in the Philippines, they are still largely relatively more young coal power plants than aging coal power plants in the Philippines. I didn't show the graph. So one may ask, why the slow penetration of renewable energy given that we have the renewable energy law in year 2008? In fact, that is where you see the increase here in the Visayas renewable energy law in 2008. Of course, there is some lag, and we see the increase here only in 2016. It's already now 2024. Okay, one reason is that because in the past we have this restriction. Renewable energy are covered by the 60-40 foreign ownership restriction. It was only last year where we liberalized that sector. And then variable renewables, solar and wind, are already cheap outside of the Philippines. Retail prices in the Philippines are still around 20 cents, while LCOE for utility scale solar is already about 2.4 to 9.6 cents. So we ask why investment in the Philippines is low. Earlier, I said that there is an incentives, but might be investors are preferring to wait for subsidies rather than to go on their own. And the country cannot subsidize everybody. So subsidies can potentially limit the pool of investors who would like to invest in the country. Now, the next question, given the patterns that we saw in the three-island grid, how does the country expand renewables? There is a need to transform the power sector infrastructure. Again, we cannot look at attracting investment just to increase renewable investment in the generation mix. When there is power, power has to be delivered. So there is a need, a concomitant need or accompanying need to expand our infrastructure expansion and making it resilient. So meaning to say, generation, we need to increase our generation because of the growth projection and the population projection, but at the same time, transmission infrastructure has to also expand. So there is a need to address bottleneck in transition. But again, while expansion and increasing resiliency and making it modern is one thing, any decision of investment still need to pass the benefit cost test in transmission. Now, there is this policy of priority dispatch, meaning to say, if energy or electricity is generated from renewable, it has a priority to be consumed or dispatched initially in the grid. However, our grid is not fully connected. Luzon and Visayas are connected with a 230 kilovolt high voltage direct current link. So this allows for an exchange of power of up to 440 megawatts. It was only on April 2023 that the Mindanao Visayas interconnection was energized with an initial load of 22.5 megawatts. So for the longest time, it was only Luzon and Visayas that were connected and Mindanao was separated. So what is the consequence? Philippines has the lowest per capita consumption among our firms. So this is likely due to inefficient high prices and reliability problems, especially for industry and services. Okay, so we see here that the per capita consumption of electricity is about 975 kilowatt 975 kilowatt for every Filipinos. Compared that with that of Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia. Okay, so because we're looking at per capita electricity or consumption because this is our indicator of well-being. The more you consume electricity efficiently, the more it means that you are living a comfortable life. So another bottleneck that we see is the regulatory burdens. Why are we not attracting investment in electricity generation? Right now there is this 104. We need 104 permits. So meaning to say, if a generation company would like to install an electricity power plant in the Philippines, it would take as long as 1.5 years before the construction starts. And this is an additional cost that would have to be recovered. Of course, it's not that we are not doing anything. The Congress has already passed the Ease of Doing Business way back in 2018 and the Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop. These are promising ways forward, but there's still some working gains that we are experiencing. So implementation and operationalization to realize the full intent of the law, there is a need to expedite. And there is also what we have been hearing, the right of way problems in terms of building transmission. So structural changes in the energy sector, both in the generation, transmission, and distribution, must be mainstreamed with the economic development. Mainstream meaning it has to go side by side with economic development. Economic development means economic growth. There is also the increasing population. So while we aspire to have to transition to cleaner energy, we also have to consider achieving universal electricity access, which is a fundamental goal of a developing country. Some Filipinos still have limited access to reliable electricity. It's one thing to have access, it's also another thing to have a reliable electricity, because for the point of view of a business, from the point of view of the business community, having an unreliable electricity increases the cost of doing business. You can imagine a manufacturing company where it experiences an unreliable electricity, just the flickering of electricity light. You cannot just turn back on the operation and it will continue, because once electricity flickered and the operation stopped by one moment, then that whole batch of manufacturing production is already a waste. So it increases the cost of doing business. Affordability has eluded the country for many decades. Here is a picture showing electricity prices in the Philippines compared with our neighbors. Prices in the Philippines have been high by regional standards. In another paper that we conducted, we noted that the high electricity price may have contributed to the early deindustrialization that we see in the patterns of the structural transformation of the country. Here you may say that Thailand, Korea, even Vietnam, electricity is subsidized and therefore electricity is cheap. And Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, these are high-income country. And the only countries in Southeast Asia where electricity is deregulated is Singapore and the Philippines. But Singapore is a high-income country, and our residential electricity price is almost the same as that of Singapore. So the question is, why are electricity prices high in the Philippines? Answering this question would require another 40 minutes. So I put here the link on YouTube where I have a full presentation answering this question. But in a nutshell, EPIRA, the Electric Power Industry Reform Act that we had way back in 2000, removed blanket subsidies. Back then, the government was losing more and more money. So that contributed to the economic crisis of the Philippines because subsidies were growing. Pre-EPIRA, before EPIRA, prices are understated. That was when the country was experiencing blackout, months and months of blackout. Having a blackout means that the effective price of electricity is so high that you cannot really buy electricity. So prices are understated. Post-EPIRA prices are high because of inefficiency in the system. So it makes the sector less efficient than its potential. This is due to the inadequate and unreliable capacity, governance failures. I'm not just talking about today, but over the years, governance failures which deter new entrants, resulting in limited competition in the generation sector. There is seemingly contradicting instruments, EPIRA, which aim to reduce electricity costs, and there is that RE law, which is the objective is to increase generation capacity, with the objective of increasing the RE share in the generation capacity. Inadequate transmission line and uncoordinated planning of investment in generation and transmission. So, and others may also say overtaxation. Again, as the Philippines still a developing country, the agenda or the objective is again to raise the living standards. And this is reflected in the vision for the Philippines by 2040 or by 2050, where we have this vision of having a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay. As I've said, electricity consumption per capita, that's an indicator of well-being in the energy sector. Why? For the middle-income households, if you can afford to have your washing machine, your blender, your microwave, you're living comfortably. Or for the low-income households, having just an electric light bulb means it's an improvement of your well-being. So that's what it means when we are increasing our electricity consumption by being able to afford all this electricity and being able all these appliances and being able to pay for electricity, meaning we're living a comfortable life. So, but we are trying to consume electricity efficiently. So that's why in the during this administration, embedded in its #1 socioeconomic agenda, protecting purchasing power of the Filipinos, is reducing energy costs to families. So there is that hope. The question is, can transitioning to RE help in making electricity accessible and affordable? Meaning to say, achieving this objective of reducing energy or electricity costs for the Filipinos. RE sources, renewable energy sources, such as decentralized solar power and microgrids can play a crucial role in reaching remote and underserved communities, meaning making electricity more accessible. However, in transitioning to cleaner energy, we'd like to invoke the principles of the economic principles of transitioning efficiently to cleaner energy. What does it mean when we say efficient? In layman's word, efficient means the absence of waste. So we have to take into account all the costs. So efficient or the least social cost, when we say social cost, it means that we are including the social cost of pollution, which means including domestic cost from carbon emission and the cost of local pollutants. In a study that we did, the more costly is actually local pollutants, which affects our health. Okay, so these local pollutants are citrus oxide, nitrous oxide, and particulate matter. So this has to be included in the cost to level the playing field between fossil fuels and renewable energy. We tend to see cheaper prices for coal power plants for coal because externalities from local and carbon emissions are not taken into account. Meaning to say they are not internalized, they are not part of the cost. Hence, they are valued relatively cheaper than you might say renewable in the past, even though renewable have now reduced its cost because of the development technology. So the efficient energy transition should take this cost into account, as well as the cost of declining, as well as the declining cost of wind and solar because of the technology, and the low cost of managing intermittency. Intermittency because it's variable renewable, meaning to say the wind, electricity is generated when the wind is blowing or when the sun is shining. So what do you do when the sun suddenly, when at night, when there is no sunshine? So we still need to generate electricity from other sources of fuel. So to level the playing field, pollution taxes should reflect the marginal damage cost of pollution, especially from the generation of coal. In the Philippines, excise taxes have become part only in the 2017 tax reform law or the CREATE. So how do we determine this efficient transition to clean energy? This is an illustration of determining the least cost generation mix. It's actually a mix, determining the best combination of fuel sources that will deliver the lowest cost of electricity. So it's called an optimal mix. It is commonly believed that because of its low fuel cost, high plant cost, and high ramping inefficiencies, that the least generation mix still involves using coal as baseload fuel, taking into account the social cost, meaning to say it has a comparative advantage in serving the minimum load over a 24-hour period such that it can run at a nearby constant rate or at a near maximum capacity. Then here, in contrast, the low plant cost and greater ramping flexibility of open cycle gas turbine plants makes them suitable as peaker. So meaning to say during the peaker hours as peaker plants. And then in the middle, you have the higher plant cost and greater and greater energy efficiency of combined cycle gas turbine plants. So making them the least choice to be run in the hours of intermediate demand. So in determining the least cost generation mix, we can use this method called screening curves that will determine the combination of fuel that will deliver the least cost electricity. So we did this study way back in 2018, and in this study, to simplify, we already deducted the renewable to the renewable energy and to satisfy residual demand. So meaning to say, we try to illustrate at which hour will coal run, and at which hour will the CCGT run. So here you're just plotting the average cost as a linear function, and here we're determining at which hour this would run. So we find that for Luzon, I'm showing here the generation mix for Luzon. Coal is the least cost generating fuel for the low demand hours of 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. And what is run during the base load can be run all day, and then the rest of the day will be satisfied by the CCGT. So this method can be extended to determine at which time where renewable energy can run. Again, right now, the Philippines has still very low penetration of renewable energy. And in this stages of energy transition, the Philippines is in this low renewable penetration stage. I take note that transition is not abrupt. From the word itself, it's not an overnight process. The president recognized that it's not, an easy task. It's not abrupt. From the word itself, it is a transition. It is a dynamic process, meaning to say time is involved. It's over time. So here, the Philippines is at this stage, the low renewable penetration. Then you have the high renewable, and price may become volatile when a very high penetration of renewable energy is in the generation mix. Now, given that the Philippines is at this low stage of renewable penetration, this is not actually a bad news. It actually put us in a better position to implement reforms. So we are in a good position to implement reforms necessary for energy transition. The current administration has continued this moratorium on new coal power plants. So meaning to say, we will not be building any new coal power plants except maybe for industrial own use. The renewable energy sector has already been liberalized, meaning to say the 60-40 foreign ownership rule has been relaxed, and 100% of foreign investors can come in, meaning to say foreign investors can own renewable energy investment 100%. We now have a very strong Energy Regulatory Commission, our ERC, and a strengthened DOE. This is already being discussed in the Congress. There is also a discussion of reviewing our transmission, the franchise operation of our transmission, and transmission expansion is already being discussed in the Congress and also in our executive. Now, all this intention, it's also in the plan, in the socio-economic agenda. The challenge is to translate these intentions to actual reforms to realize our ambition by year 2040 or 2050 for that bagong Pilipinas that is envisioned by the current administration. So while plans are good, implementation is also another thing. In the last 10 minutes of this presentation, let me now walk you through to our experience in engaging stakeholders as we have several projects on electricity and on energy. The first one was a project called Energy Policy and Development Program. This was conducted from 2014 in 2018 and funded by the USAID. It mainly supported the national government, mainly NEDA, and the DOE in policy analysis and formulation. I think these four crucial components made it effective in terms of engaging with the stakeholders. It has research, policy development and advisory, capacity building, and most importantly, communication. It is making use of economics and at the same time science in its research in engaging with the stakeholders. When the first component is the research, but we were not conducting research for research purposes. When we were conducting research in the conduct of those research studies, they are validated through workshop, not just with the academe, but already with the stakeholders, energy experts, and practitioners. So we do not wait for the research to be completed before we start with the engagement. So that is one. And then another engagement is through policy, meaning to say it not just the academe consulting with the academe. There is also that engagement and consultations with key stakeholders. In this case, it's the NEDA, DOE, PEMC, and also the Energy Regulatory Commission, and also the DOE. This research help improve capacity to guide and inform energy-related policy and practice through the conduct of this research. Again, it's not just research for the sake of doing research. In addition to having this engagement and workshop, we were also able to conduct policy forums where the research or it's not the research and even the policy issue of the days are being discussed. One good thing, one lesson that stayed with me in the conduct of this project is that when these policy forums are conducted by the academe, we are perceived as neutral. So we are giving a neutral platform to the stakeholders who sometimes may be, politically charged. So if it's conducted by the academe, it's perceived as neutral, then there is an open discussion. So that's one thing. So meaning to say keeping the neutrality when it is organized by the academe. And then as we go through this engagement, we are being invited to serve as resource person. So the academe should not shy away when we receive invitation to be resource person and providing inputs to policy making. Of course, we just need to be patient from experience, but I also hear from colleagues that they shy away from becoming resource persons. We are giving our expert opinions, which may or may not be accommodated or taken into account, but at least we shared our voice and coming from from our research that is backed by evidence and theory. And as we engage through several of these stakeholders, we may also be invited to the executive department in giving them briefing so that they somehow they go out of their box just listening to one another in the government sector. This comes from the government executive that they also need to hear outside perspective coming from the academe. So those engagement are very important. Now, communicating research is also crucial in those four components. Communicating research, the method that we know from the academe is presenting at conferences, both national and international. But this is presenting at conferences is also needed because we're from the academe, but this is communicating with our academic peers. So it's important that when we, for the project, we organize conferences where both academe practitioners and policymakers are invited. So it's a different type of conference that we are used to as an academe in attending. So, and then we do not shy away from engaging with other jurisdiction in other countries. Okay, so meaning to say we can learn lessons from best practices outside of the Philippines. So we should not shy away from doing that. And again, communication, engagement, influence have a lasting impact. But communication through our academic paper is one thing. Again, that is communication with our academic peers. Communication with policymakers may entail a different type of communication. Meaning to say we have to translate our academic papers into something that is palatable, to our policymakers and executives in the government, which we can think would only have time while they are stuck in traffic going from one meeting to another. So meaning to say, we have to be able to say what we want to say in a two-pager, laymanized policy brief or newspaper or brochures. And we should also not shy away from using the social media or the infographics in terms of delivering the message that we want to deliver. So we can have working papers, which is the more technical paper, but we should also be having policy briefs and also opinion pieces in magazine or even in the broadsheet. And so those are very important, communicating our research, which may require a different skill set than what we are used to as academics. Again, you may say that it's because the project was funded by USAID and therefore it has a lot of funding. But please note that in the middle of this project, we have experienced a major budget cut because of the change in administration of the funding agency back in the US. So that major budget cut presented a challenge to the project. But the challenge has also presented itself an opportunity. So because of the budget cut, we continued on with the project, but this time engaging and tapping resources of partners. So when we conducted the succeeding policy forums or executive seminar, part of the funding in organizing the seminar or the forum came from partners like IFC and PCC. And we also conducted seminars where we hear from the private sector. So again, because of the budget cut, what the project did, because private sectors, right, we invited them to speak, but they are also in charge of, sponsoring the event. So at one point, our partner said, you're inviting us to give the talk and also inviting us to pay for the conduct of the seminar. But it's a way of engaging with the stakeholder and to maximize the resources at hand and be creative as well. And then it's also important when we conduct projects that we sustain the gains from the project. So at the time when the project started, Senator Gatchalian was new in the Senate Committee on Energy, and she learned about the team that are engaged in this energy, and that gave him an idea that the country also need to have an energy think tank policy. And he traveled across the in other parts of the world, like in the US and in Europe, and he found out that there are energy institutions existing in the academe that supports policy making or the crafting of policies on energy. And because of that, he initiated the bill establishing an energy institute at the Senate. And then at the Congress, there was also a counterpart bill which Representative Stella Kimbo mainly supported, and it's become already a law, which is the Republic Act 11572, establishing that energy research. And again, sustaining the gains from the project doesn't just having reports. So the research studies were translated into a book, and it was actually recognized by the National Academy of Science and Technology as an outstanding book awardee. This powering the Philippine economy. So, and then again, we do not stop by producing reports. We also submitted those research into journal, and it became journal articles. And if you are, delivering quality output, then projects would come, supporting your advocacy on energy. And from EPDP, it was came the GPDP, or the Gas Policy and Development Project, and it's now on its third tranche of engaging in year 3 of the Gas Policy and Development Project. And I also believe that because of this, the handling of this project and the output and the team, that also paved the way for having the partnership of the Ateneo Department of Economics, the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development, with the House of Representatives. So one lesson here with when engaging with our stakeholders, specifically the policymakers, is that we need to cultivate relationship with the policymakers, and this takes time. The project that we started was 4 years in the making, and it took several years to have another project again. So with the policymakers. Also, it's very important to have that to cultivate that relationship, meaning giving them giving them policy research studies as serving as inputs to policy making. And this surely can yield significant opportunities. The project with the House of Representatives has already ended last February 2020, February of this year. And another lessons learned from managing and handling this project is the importance of having champion, particularly at the highest policy-making level. So in our case, it was Secretary Balisacan, Senator Gatchalian, and Representative Stella Kimbo, who really championed, who believed in evidence-based research as serving as policy inputs. But for the group, for the research from the academe, it is also important having that we are perceived to be neutral so that we can navigate through the changes in government leadership. Neutrality, this is very important, meaning to say we are providing policymakers with research that is grounded on evidence and grounded in theory. We do not just criticize, but we provide constructive criticisms by offering solutions backed by research. And in doing so, it is important to have that interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary engagement, meaning to say we go out of our silos, meaning to say, and economists can work with engineers or with other natural scientists and vice versa. We also need to have a dedicated research team. So it's very important. Nowadays, we see research lab in various departments, but we hope to see more transdisciplinary nature. Like one example would be the project that Kendra and I had with the coastal research headed by Dr. Emma Porio. So it's a different experts in the different fields doing research together. And there is also that another lesson is we have to follow through continuity of efforts through legislative reforms. And one way of doing this, again, is not being shy when we are invited to provide policy inputs. So evidence is more, as concluding remarks, evidence is more likely to influence policymakers when presented to them during windows of opportunity. Again, we should not be frustrated, but be more patient. We cannot change the policy landscape by one study. It takes sometimes 20 years or even more than 20 years, okay, to get that window opportunity. So we need to watch out for that window of opportunity when they are motivated to pay attention to and solve a particular problem. The way in which evidence, meaning research, is co-produced, framed, timed, and presented can be as important as its substance. So meaning to say, when we present it, so the timing is very important. Identify the actors with the power to change policy. Again, going back to the lesson of having a champion at the highest policy-making level. And the actors, these actors would be able to influence policymakers. Great research is informed by engaging with people outside of our academic circle. So meaning to say, we also learn from them how to communicate, and there are other aspects of research and policies that we may not see that can enrich our own academic research. So our role as academics is to build evidence grounded in theory. When the time is ripe for reform, we already supply the reform-minded policymakers with ammunition. I'll stop here. Apologize for going a little bit over time. Thank you. So I look forward to interacting with the audience.
Thank you very much, Doc Maha. No, you did not go over time. Thank you very much for your very insightful talk on the landscape of energy transition in a low-income economy, and really for sharing about the opportunities for stakeholder engagement and decision-making challenging us to cultivate relationships with policymakers and explore various strategies to lobby for a low carbon economy. At this point of the program, we will now be having our open forum. We have received a number of questions directly through chat, and we have room for a few of them. Yeah, our first question reads, this is sent anonymously. As seen in the energy matrix that you presented, natural gas is decreasing. What is the state of CCGT plants? It seems promising according to your study to replace based on load instead of coal.
Okay, so it's not the plant but the fuel that we're worried about. Okay, so the expectation, the depletion of the natural gas in Luzon, this is Malampaya, we already saw this, the country already saw this before the pandemic. So the immediate solution that we were looking at the time is the importation of natural gas, because now natural gas can be liquefied. So it's the importation of the liquefied natural gas. So meaning to say it's now easy to transport. We do not need to build a pipe. Okay, because the Malampaya, in order for that to be used as a fuel, it's connected by a pipe through the in the Batangas, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so that was the immediate solution. Then the pandemic happens and also the war in Ukraine happens. So which somehow has an implication on the importation. So but nonetheless, the technology is there, and there is a race among the private sector to build the terminal for LNG, meaning to say we need to receive the liquefied and then transport it to the natural gas power plant and then regasify and use that as fuel. So that's one way of addressing natural gas, addressing the depletion of Malampaya. But note that natural gas is not as clean as okay, as renewable, but it is not as dirty as coal. Okay, so meaning to say carbon emission when natural gas is burned is less than the carbon emission when coal power plant is burned. So somehow natural gas is seen as, you know, somehow it's labeled as bridge to renewable, to transition to cleaner energy, or it can also serve as a balancing the intermittency created by variable renewable. So again, the way we should be looking at this is what would be the mix of this fuel, you know, fuel sources that would deliver the lowest cost of electricity to us. So it's not just one, it's the combination of all these fuel sources.
Thank you very much for answering that question, and she also noted that in chat. Related to this, Paul, what about our transmission? Has to change in order to accommodate a larger RE share in our generation matrix.
Yes. In the study that we did with Ateneo and the House of Representatives, we actually focus on transmission. The disruption and the disruption of the disruption that we are experiencing in the transmission system, no? So right now, we recognize that the government, even the DOE, recognize the inadequacy of transmission with the current generation. That's why that's one of the reason, not the entire reason why we have this brownouts, because where the demand is largely in Luzon, but you have an excess power capacity in the Visayas, but because of the limited, connection, we cannot really bring the excess power from Visayas to Luzon. So it's a problem of transmission. And again, as we transition from fossil fuel based to cleaner energy, because of its variability, the variability of solar and wind, meaning to say electricity is generated when the wind is blowing and when the sun is shining, that would have impact in the system. So our grid has to be modernized, or modernized to be able to cope with this variability. So with that variability, meaning to say managing the intermittency, we also need to have that source of power generation where this intermittency can be balanced. So that has to, again, it's not just increasing investment. the share of renewable in our generation, it has to be accompanied by investment in modernizing our grid and also in expanding our grid, because we are looking at that economic growth to achieve that high growth, because Ambition 2040 is really putting us in the league of South Korea. So that means high economic growth. And where would that growth comes from? Energy is a major input of that economic growth.
So it's really a very interesting point, really, Dr. Ravago, because even if we have, for example, explored more sources of RE, but if the transmission is, we don't develop these technologies, then we will still be having a hard time.
Yes. Sorry, Jean. I just want to point out, even DOE Secretary Popo Ratilla have always noted that, we have a lot of renewable energy in the Visayas, but they become stranded because they cannot be delivered to where it is needed.
I see. And that's probably been our experiences lately. I'm currently based in Iloilo, and we've really been having a lot of intermittent electricity events. So speaking of having a more stable energy source, that's why you mentioned earlier still, the role of coal, for example, and earlier natural gas. Another question reads, anonymously sent, should we seriously study the possibility of rehabilitating and operating the Bataan nuclear power plant? Nuclear plants do not have carbon emissions. And you mentioned South Korea. So South Korea, they have read, has a nuclear plant that is an identical twin of the BNPP, made also by Westinghouse, which has operated for more than 3 decades without any incident.
Yeah, okay. So my view on that, again, from economics perspective, we have to consider the combination, okay? The combination of fuels, no, not fossil fuels, the combination of fuels that will generate electricity. So nuclear is one source of fuel. But again, when we consider them in the mix, cost, the social costs have to be included. So in this case, if it's nuclear, then the decommissioning has to be included. We know that nuclear doesn't have carbon emission, but when we evaluate them, whether it will be included in the mix, the decommissioning cost has to be included, right? With regards to BNPP, BNPP is very specific. And my view is that there are now newer technologies that, like the small modular reactors, that may be considered. So again, we need to study this, and studying the technology is one thing, but we also have to consider the capacity, the human capital that we have in terms of operating. It has been so long where we do not have nuclear power plant in the country. We have the PNRI. Correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the good physicists that we have are working in other countries. So we should find a way to bring them back if we are to pursue this. I'm not against having a nuclear fuel in the mix, as long as we properly evaluate them. And again, it's not one or the other. It has to be a combination. What is the combination that will deliver us the lowest electricity? Because that is what we're looking for, affordability and accessibility.
And it's really important to note the social cost nga, as you mentioned po. And so related to that, I know there are lots of debates about the nuclear power plant, and a lot of conflict of interest as well. So our next question reads, Kendra Gotangco Gonzales, the lesson learned in the concluding remarks on co-production and engagement of stakeholders outside of the academe resonate well with our discussions among the My Climate Risk Hubs. In the case of the energy sector, have there been tensions or conflicting interests of different players? And how have you navigated these to better promote co-production?
Yes, of course, especially in the energy sector. One, even within the academe, okay, when I did my dissertation, we already recognized this. Because one would be semantics, different fields would have different vocabulary, and sometimes it's different to, having a common ground just based on semantics. So we need to overcome that within the academe. Another thing is working together. We have different framework. Okay, so we need to somehow reconcile and recognize that each one, each group, each discipline has something to bring to the table. So that's one. So there is that tension within the academe. Then even within the government, there is also that tension. That's why one lesson that stayed with me when we were conducting those policy forum is that when it is conducted by the academe, we are perceived to be neutral. So these stakeholders, both from the private sector and from the government come together because it is organized by the academe. It is organized by the private sector, then, the government may be perceived to be, but if it's organized by one private sector, let's say one generation company, and DOE goes there or another, government agency goes there, then they may be perceived as favoring that particular generation company. So being organized by the academe is perceived to be neutral. But there are also instances where the academe is not perceived as neutral because of all the advocacies they are presenting. So again, it's very important for us to be neutral, to be able to navigate these conflicting interests. When I say neutral, we do not just criticize, but offer solution that is backed by research and not just, blanket criticisms or personal attacks.
And that seriously is really a challenge for us,
Yes.
especially as we continue to cultivate our relationship with the policymakers, decision makers. Speaking of bring something to the table, we have another question from Nina Rivera. She asked, where do we start as college students in terms of our, for example, literature review to learn more about the energy transition and policies so that they can provide also bring something to the table, providing solution?
Yes, of course. I always tell my students, of course, start by making a good paper. Okay, so by making a good paper, students now are very lucky. Okay, because you have Google at your fingertips. You do not experience going to the library and getting those index card when doing a research. You probably you cannot relate with what I am saying. But you have Google, you have AI. So make good use of the technology. But at the same time, AI, I know that this is still debatable, but I encourage my student to use AI, but use it to further and, making us more efficient researcher. So if you want to do a paper, you start with papers that are coming from a journal, academic journal. Because if it's papers coming from academic journal, it is vetted, okay, by academic peers, it is objective, and it uses methods, okay? So meaning may evidence and it's grounded in theory. So always when you're doing a paper and you want to present an evidence-based research, your literature review, if you're looking at that, should all be papers from journal, meaning say academic papers. Because that would also influence, I advise students doing their thesis, that would also influence your style of writing, the language that you choose. So reading journal papers, academic papers is very important if you want to be a good researcher.
Thank you very much for that, Doc Maha. And, AI, mentioning AI nga po, even these kinds of technologies are very energy intensive with the servers that have to keep on using energy. So really use these technologies wisely. We have room for maybe one or two questions, so I'll read them. We have one question about industry. So are there certain industries that will benefit the most, especially in the Philippines, from the switch to clean energy, given the nature of their activities or services, and also how they're more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change?
Again, when we switch, remember, switching to cleaner energy, its output is still electricity, right? So at the end of the day, what's important for industry is reliable electricity. So meaning to say, as long as we have that reliable electricity, then industry will benefit from it. Remember what I said earlier, when you have unreliable electricity, if you are a manufacturing company and energy or electricity intensive company, you rely on reliable electricity to produce your output, your goods, right? So if you have unreliable electricity, it increases the cost of doing business. So that electricity is coming from burning fuels and burning fuels or generating it from renewable. So what's important is having that electricity as output coming from this fuel, whether it's renewable or non-renewable.
All right, thank you for answering that, Doc Maha. This is our final question. This is from Mr. Benji Panahon, and it reads, the Philippine targets a 35% RE mix by 2030 and 50% by 2040. Given the RE mix in 2023 is only 22%, do you think it's still possible for the country to reach its 2030 and 2040 targets? And what needs to happen for this to be achieved?
Okay, I don't have a crystal ball. I do not project. But nonetheless, we are looking at economic growth, right? So meaning to say, it would require more energy, more electricity. So we really need to expand, expand the pie. Okay, so meaning to say, it require more energy, more sources of electricity or more energy. So that increase, okay, that we require may come from more renewable, and that would expand its share in our energy mix. What needs to happen, again, we need to look at it in a system. When we are looking at attracting energy investment in energy generation, we also need to look at our investments in transmission, and also distribution. Transmission and distribution, these are natural monopoly. So the biggest distribution is Meralco, and that's in Luzon, where most industries are. And natural monopoly is the NGCP is our only one concession that manage and operates our transmission system. So meaning to say, investment in this is also critical if we want to reach that aspiration of having more renewable energy in our mix.
Thank you very much for highlighting. It's really a whole system solution. There are lots of things that have to be done at different components of the system, but then that also offers a lot of opportunities for work, action, and research.
Yes, and if I may add, Jean, so I just mentioned generation and transmission, but we also need to work on our, rules, governance. As I mentioned, we have a lot of rules, but the problem is in the implementation, like the regulatory burdens that investors are experiencing. So we need to relax those. So one best practice, if I may mention, that this is cited in the literature, is the experience of Texas in the US, where they relax or this regulatory burden and focus on transmission, actually. So easing the regulatory burden and focusing on investment in transmission, and then investment in renewable come in, because investment in generation is already large, is privatized. So we need to focus on those two, and they will come in, and that would increase the renewable share in our mix.
We'll find that experience in our country. So that is all the time that we have for the open forum. Thank you very much, Dr. Ravago, for your answers. And thank you as well to our participants for your questions. They've really made our open forum engaging and meaningful. We now move to the awarding of the certificate. We present this certificate of appreciation to Dr. Majah-Leah V Ravago for sharing her time and insights in the webinar titled Efficient Energy Transition, Science and Stakeholder Engagement, the Case of the Philippine Electricity Policy, held on the 8th of May 2024, signed by Jean Jardeleza Mijares, Program Manager for Climate and Disaster Resilience at the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, and Dr. Kendra Gotangco Gonzales, Director of the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability and focal point of the My Climate Risk Ateneo de Manila University Regional Hub. Thank you very much again, Dr. Ravago, for sharing your time and insights with us. To deliver the closing remarks, may we call on Dr. Maria Asunta Cuyagkeng, Professor at the Department of Educational Leadership and Management of the Gokongwei Brothers School of Education and Learning Design, Executive Director of the Lily Gokongwei Ngochua Leadership Academy, and a collaborator of the Ateneo MCR Regional Hub.
Thank you so much, Jean. And thank you for that very enlightening talk, Maha. I have always appreciated how Dr. Ravago can explain complex ideas with such clarity. She has shown us how complex this problem is, weaving together the economic, social, and environmental aspects of energy. From Dr. Ravago, we heard that policy has a big role to play if we want to transition not only to an optimized energy mix that will safeguard our environment and climate, but also to transition to a higher quality of life for Filipinos that give them choices in terms of their livelihood and overall well-being, and has lower social impact. It is interesting that my generation, I'm dating myself, but my generation has hoped for this as far back as the 1970s, at the time when brownouts and the BNPP were big issues, more than 50 years ago. But we have not attained this because our policies have always been influenced by politics of self-interest. So Dr. Ravago's insight of identifying windows of opportunity and keeping neutral are very important. From her presentation, I'd like to think that there is hope. If we can get more users and policymakers to truly appreciate the complexity of this problem that cannot be solved by linear thinking or by approaches that forget the stakeholders. She has emphasized the need to engage stakeholders in addressing climate and energy risk, and I truly appreciate her suggestions for speaking the language of stakeholders and reaching out to those who can make changes, policymakers and the private sector, for example, as well as other actions like sustaining gains and disseminating information. It was really an enlightening talk. As we close the series of my climate risk webinars for the semester, let's keep hoping and doing our share for our climate and also for our people. Thank you to Dr. Kendra Gotangco Gonzales, Ms. Jean Jardeleza Mijares, and Mr. Daniel Ratilla for organizing this very important MCR series, which is crucial in raising awareness and forming great insights. We look forward to your future webinars. And thank you to all of you for participating in this webinar. Help us spread the not so good news on our climate risk. We may yet find a way out if we put our heads, hands, and hearts together. Again, thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cuyagkeng, for leaving us with a message of hope in the midst of the complexity of the problem of the interplay of our climate change experiences and the energy sector. At this point, may we request everyone to please turn on your cameras for our group photo. So we have a remembrance. So I'm just waiting for a few more to open their cameras and I'll be taking the screenshots. All right, taking the screenshot of the first panel in 3, 2, 1. Hold your smiles. I'm taking the screenshot of the second panel. 3, 2, 1. And finally, the screenshot of the last. Thank you very much, everyone, for indulging us. And it's so great to see everyone's faces and smiles. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Before we close, we would like to share about an initiative that you can be part of in the Ateneo Hub of My Climate Risk. Recognizing that each of us has our own climate stories and that we all have experienced climate change impacts one way or another, the Hub has launched this initiative grounded on the belief that we are all storytellers and scientists. So we'd love to hear or read your story. This is an open call for submissions to the My Climate Risk Climate Stories initiative, especially as we seek to elevate the Southeast Asian voice on the experience of climate change. If you are interested in submitting, you may submit through the link flashed on screen. The tech team has also posted the link in chat. We would also like to plug another initiative by another network hosted by the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, the ASEAN University Network on Ecological Education and Culture, or AUNEEC. We invite everyone in Southeast Asia to submit to hashtag reframing the city, to submit a photo that captures sustainability tensions in your city, whether it's a tug between culture and modernity, or environmental conservation and urban development, for example. This is to showcase our city's realities, especially in the modern times, and to spark creative solutions. To read the mechanics and learn more, you may access the details on EDC and AIS Instagram pages with the handles flashed on screen. And finally, to our dear participants, please answer the evaluation survey with the QR code and link flashed on screen. Requests for e-certificates may be coursed through the same form. Thank you again, Dr. Ravago, for being here, for sharing to us about the landscape of the energy transition, efficient energy transition in the Philippines. We'd also like to thank our sign language interpreters this afternoon, Ms. Edna Comia and Ms. Annalisa Regis Tolentino, for making our event more sustainable and more inclusive. And of course, to all of you, dear participants, thank you very much for being here. We hope that you have gained fresh insights on the possibility for a more efficient and clean energy landscape, the challenges and the opportunities for fueling a low-carbon economic growth. Again, please don't forget to accomplish our event evaluation form. The tech team has posted the link in chat. Requests for e-certificates will be coursed through the same form. As we bring this series of discussions to a close, we sincerely thank everyone for their enthusiastic participation and support. From our very first session back in the 17th of April to today, we hope that this multidisciplinary discussion have sparked new insights for everyone as we reflect on how to truly approach climate as if people mattered. This series in particular, climate research, may have come to an end, but we still have another event in store for everyone. In celebration of the Laudato Si Week this year, which marks the 9th year Pope Francis published Laudato Si, the encyclical on the care of our common home, we are excited to bring to you a panel discussion centering on two bookends of the Laudato Si, 7 Laudato Si goals: response to the cry of the earth and community resilience and empowerment. Please stay tuned on how you can register, be part of this online through the AIS Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn pages, and through the MCR Ateneo de Manila University website and the MCR mailing list. Okay, so that is it for today's session. Thank you very much, everyone, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the day, the rest of the week.
Bye. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Very much, Dr. Hassan.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Kendra. Thank you very much. At this point, we're happy to be